Okay, good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. Rebecca, can you go to the first slide, please? Thank you. Today's webinar is GlobalGAP Certification in the Times of COVID-19. It's co-hosted by NSF International and GlobalGAP North America. We are very lucky to have three excellent speakers for us today on our panel. Robin Rose, Key Account Manager with GlobalGAP North America, Rebecca Anderson, Technical Key Account Manager with GlobalGAP North America, and Stephanie Sonneveld, Certification Manager for Agriculture at NSF International. Just a few notes before I hand it over to our first speaker. This webinar is being recorded, and we will be distributing a link to the recording after the webinar is over. We're planning time for questions at the end, so please feel free to enter your questions into the question box or the chat box as we go along. I will be monitoring this information and sending it out, and then if we have time, hopefully we'll be able to get to any questions at the end. If we do not have time to get to all the questions and answers, we will be sending out a copy of all the questions with answers at the end of the call as well. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Robin Rose as our first speaker.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks to everybody at NSF International for inviting us to be part of this webinar today, and everybody attending. I really appreciate you spending your time with us. My name is Robin Rose. I'm the Key Account Manager for GlobalGAP North America. I live in Watsonville, California, among the berry fields, and I joined GlobalGAP North America about a year ago after spending about 5 years with a major natural foods retailer and the 10 years before that running a certification program. So we know right now that this is a time of super unique circumstances and unprecedented challenges across the globe. I'm hoping we can provide you with some useful information and additional resources to help you in your business. If you have any questions about what we're presenting here, please don't hesitate to contact either Rebecca or I after this presentation. We're always happy to talk with you. So my guess is that you all here listening are likely at least somewhat familiar with GlobalGAP and our standards, but want to just give you a real quick overview. We're a global organization headquartered in Cologne, Germany. GlobalGAP North America is a subsidiary company based out of the United States, and there's 4 of us staff members dedicated to serving the North American community. 2 are located in Portland, Oregon, and 2 of us, Rebecca here and myself, are in Central California. GlobalGAP was founded in 1997 to harmonize standards for product safety, environmental sustainability, and health, safety, and welfare for workers and animals. The harmonization allowed producers to avoid having multiple audits for multiple buyers. So GlobalGAP is an independent certification system for good agricultural practices, including production practice standards and a set of rules for audits and certification programs. I'm hoping my slide clicking is going to work. So GlobalGAP offers more than 40 standards and programs worldwide, and there's a few which are of specific relevance to producers and buyers here in North America that I want to call attention to. First is the flagship standard known as Integrated Farm Assurance, or IFA. This standard includes not only food safety and traceability, but also has standards for environmental sustainability and worker health and safety. IFA is recognized globally and is generally the preferred standard of European buyers. IFA is set up as a modular structure, adding on specificity for scopes and subscopes. So for, say, example, an apple grower, you start with an all-farm module, then a crops module, then a fruit and vegetables module. You can include add-on standards such as SCI Platform's FSA, Tesco's Nurture module, or FSMA add-on. And there's a bunch of others that you can put on top of IFA. We're currently transitioning from one version of IFA to the next, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. And then a product which we have unique to the U.S. market is the Harmonized Produce Safety Standard, or HPSS. As a recognition of the regulatory requirements around environmental and labor issues that are already in place in the USA, this standard covers only food safety and traceability. HPSS is the result of an initiative managed by United Fresh that's attempting to bring harmonization across certifications in order to reduce redundancy and overlap in audits. HPSS was developed by and for the USA market and may not have the same level of global recognition that IFA has, though it should be accepted by any buyer requiring a GFSI benchmark standard. HPSS uses verbatim the control points from the harmonized standard overseen by United Fresh with a format that's been modified a bit to achieve GFSI benchmarking. It's in general less prescriptive and more risk-based than IFA, meaning that producers have more ability to customize your food safety plans to your own operations. And HPSS is set up in a logical order from food safety management and steps through the different production phases, categorizing each stage, such as field history and then harvest. While no non-governmental organization can issue FSMA compliance documentation, HPSS is aligned with FSMA to help producers ensure that they're meeting FSMA requirements. So both IFA and HPSS offer GFSI benchmark certification, and both offer group and individual certification. HPSS producer license fees are a bit less than IFA producer license fees. So I'm presenting this slide to you as many USA producers don't realize that they have a choice in GlobalGAP farm standards. If you're currently certified to IFA, you might want to investigate whether your buyers would be equally satisfied with HPSS. We feel that the harmonized standard has many benefits for producers in the USA, particularly in terms of flexibility, reduction in scope, and lower fees. If you speak with a buyer who's not willing to accept HPSS, you can just let us know, either Rebecca or I or anybody else at GlobalGAP North America. We'll communicate directly with that buyer. As HPSS is relatively new to the scene, sometimes the buyers just need to be more informed about what it is and its GFSI status. All right, I'm trying to move the slide again. Additional standards that might be of interest to the North American market include our new Produce Handling Assurance Standard, or PHA. This is a new offering that's a standalone option for post-harvest facilities that are doing pre-processing, things like washing, packing, cooling, sorting. So since IFA and HPSS are really pre-farm gate standards, the addition of the PHA standard allows you to certify your product from field to sale under one scheme, likely with only one audit visit. PHA is aligned with the FSMA PSR and preventative control rules and includes HACCP risk analysis. It's currently in the process of achieving GFSI benchmarking and is currently available for North American producers. And then in addition to these base standards, we also have a number of add-ons, which I mentioned before, FSMA, the SCI platform, we have our risk assessment on social practices, known as GRASP, and a whole slew of other add-ons, which you could always take advantage of if your buyer requested them of you. So I mentioned before that we're in the process of developing the next version of the IFA standard. We're currently working on a major overhaul of this entire standard for version 6, which is intended to be published in 2021 and obligatory in 2022. So we're basically tearing the standard down to the foundations and building it back up with a different footprint. Currently, the modular system of all farms, crop space, fruit and veg that I mentioned before, with all the categories such as food safety and environmental sustainability control points, are included in each of those modules. We're considering a new structure where each of the categories would be in their own bucket. So say food safety in one, environmental sustainability in another, worker health and safety in another, allowing producers to have flexibility to choose which buckets they want to include in their audit checklist. So this would include an added flexibility layer specifically for GFSI, so that if GFSI version updates, they'll have minimal impact on the overall version of IFA. So in addition to changes for producers, we're also taking a similar approach with our general rules and the certification process. And we're trying to specifically engage certification bodies so that the whole process can run smoother for all parties. And really our overall goal is simplification. Simplification of language, simplification of criteria, simplification of structure. We want to eliminate duplication and really have a science-backed, risk-based approach. So I'm going into this, oops, wrong direction. Going into this because there's right now an opportunity for your feedback and input. Since all of these ideas for the new IFA version 6 are currently under discussion, we're seeking input through a process called a World Consultation Tour. Prior to the pandemic, we had intended to host a series of in-person meetings around the world to solicit this stakeholder feedback. Obviously, these plans have had to change. Instead, we're hosting a series of webinar sessions in all different languages, all different time zones to allow for global participation. They're 90 minutes each, will be structured as interactive discussions. National technical working groups, our technical committees are intended to participate, and really it's the opportunity to give us feedback and help co-design the GlobalGAP IFA standard for the future. So we have 4 sessions that are specifically designed for North American stakeholders, as they're in English and they're accessible in our time zones. There are other time zones and other languages available. I think there's 39 sessions total. So that's all on our website. I highly suggest that you participate if you are interested in helping us form the basis of the standard going forward. And lastly for me, I just want to strongly encourage you to sign up for our GlobalGAP North American newsletter. Doing so is really the only way that you're going to receive information like the COVID-19 updates that Rebecca's about to present directly from GlobalGAP. This newsletter is specific to North America. We promise not to overload you with irrelevant information or clog up your inbox, but we want to be able to communicate with you directly. We try and be as transparent as possible. All of our information, our standards documents, the checklist, everything we're working on is available on our website, and we also have a variety of social media that we are present on. So now I'm going to pass this over to Rebecca Anderson, our Technical Key Account Manager for GlobalGAP North America, and she's going to talk about how this novel coronavirus is affecting certification.
Thanks so much, Robin, for the introduction to GlobalGAP and the ways that we're trying to move the standard forward even during these difficult times. I want to focus a little bit on what certification means now in the time of the pandemic. I know that most of you are just trying to make sure that we have enough food to eat, and I'm very thankful for all the work that you do to provide for the people. But with that, we want to make sure that food safety is still a priority even during this time. And so to do that, we've made sure that we have online information and links available for producers and for certification bodies and anyone in industry to make sure that you stay up to date on all of the suggestions and guidelines that are out there for you. We're also participating in different stakeholder groups, specifically in North America. We are up to date with United Fresh, PMA, CPMA, and FDA and other industry groups that are relative to this market. We are consistently interacting with buyers, retailers, and with GFSI to promote the needs of the community, including what should you have access to, what tools and resources, and making sure that we're aligned with other certification programs to make sure that there's no unfair advantages for one program over another. Other ideas include what we have our GAP Talks. It's essentially a podcast, if you will, or short blips of interviews with different stakeholders, retailers, GFSI, other regulatory individuals. So those are discussions directly from those key persons, and you could check out the links to that from the GlobalGAP webpage. But for coronavirus information, if you go to the globalgap.org landing page, you'll see this sort of icon, and that will click on that. That will take you to this informational page. So what our initial plan is for producers that need immediate relief for COVID-19 is to have a 6-month extension for certificates. This would be based upon a risk assessment by the certification body, which Stephanie will talk about how NSF handles that risk assessment. And it's up to you if your certificate is going to expire to contact the CB. This is not an automatic extension, but it's something that is available to you. There are some auditees, some certified producers who would rather just do the audit and have it available to them, and Stephanie can talk about how to get through the audit. But for those of you who have measures in place where you're not accepting visitors or there's travel restrictions, for example, in order to stay certified, we want to make sure that you have the option to extend your certificate. This would require you to commit to the next year cycle, so for 2020 to 2021. And so those are things that you need to be aware of why it's not automatic, because you need to commit to continuing certification in the future. Other things that we've done are extending the corrective action period by 28 days. This would be case by case for justified circumstances. So it's up to you and the certification body again to determine what that need is and what things are realistically possible. So for example, if you can't get access to PPE, or there's a delay with the supply chain for the inputs on your farm or facility, then those are things that we can work around and get exceptions for and extend the period of time that it takes you to close out those corrections. Other things, GlobalGAP allows an off-site and on-site module. So off-site traditionally had meant document review, risk assessment review, records review that would happen before the on-site verification, and that time period was between 48 hours and 4 weeks, but we've extended that time to allow for the verification on site to be more than 4 weeks. Right now there's no actual maximum period for that. I think it's up to the certification body to come up with a reasonable timeline, but this also allows additional flexibility for the producers to get all that information to the certification body ahead of time, to start the audit process sooner, and then for the CB to do that verification a little bit later. We also have GlobalGAP IFA Remote, which came out today. This would address those issues in September and later for the audits where the extensions were given. I don't want to spend too much time on this. I think it's up to each certification body to determine whether they want to offer that or not, but just saying that there's some flexibility in the way that audits are being conducted right now that you should be aware of. Importantly, it's worth highlighting that FDA and other regulatory food agencies have said that food is not a likely transmission of COVID-19. What this means for the food industry is that we don't really feel like it's a food safety issue, but rather it's a worker health and safety issue. So the idea that COVID-19 can be transmitted through respiratory droplets and are transmitted human to human. This means that when our workers are harvesting or in a packing shed in close quarters, this is where it's a ripe opportunity for COVID transmission. And what we're wanting to do here is we're wanting to make sure that we're protecting our workers, we're taking care of them, making sure that they know that they're important, and also keeping our businesses running, because if workers are getting sick, that means that farms and facilities are in vulnerable positions in terms of being able to operate. So considering that this is a worker health and safety issue that we're all responsible for. But knowing that, and knowing that most farms in GlobalGAP have already existing worker health and safety plans in place, have best hygiene practices, we think that these and you as farmers are well prepared for the guidance and implementation of COVID-19 best hygiene practices. So as we are focusing on PPE and sanitary facilities, it's just the idea of reinforcing these practices and perhaps increasing frequency of the sanitation. So I wanted to dive in a little bit deeper into the specific requirements that relate to COVID-19 best practices and GlobalGAP. So one of the main topics that we've been hearing in the news and from all of the public health regulatory agencies is this idea that social distancing is to ensure workers have sufficient space, that we're preventing them from being in contact with those respiratory droplets. So this also could include things like physical protection or face masks, things like that. But it's really hard to do this in packing sheds and fields where workers are constantly interacting. So some types of strategies that would work would be staggering breaks, staggering working shifts, things like that to really help space people out. Also considering break areas where people are working. We've heard of facilities having additional tables brought in to make sure that people can space out during break times. Other things would be keeping sick workers home. Workers who show signs of illness should not work with produce. This was already in the standard. This is something that you should already have in place. But at this point, this would be working with your local public health authorities to determine what measures that you would need in place to determine if workers are sick and determine what your responsibilities are if workers do show signs of illness. So it wouldn't be up to us to tell you that you need to send people home, but you adopting the practices of your local organizations and legal responsibilities. And of course, most importantly is washing hands often. And for food safety, you've already had requirements for soap and water. It's just reinforcing those best practices and giving workers the opportunity to wash their hands often and protect themselves as well. Other things that you would need to be aware of for specific to GlobalGAP is that you already have requirements to develop emergency procedures in the case of natural disasters, and now adding this added pandemic component. And some ways that this may impact you, as we've just briefly mentioned, is that you may have to consider times where you have less workers. And how will you be able to operate on this minimal staff? So think of scenarios in which you would have temporary, short-term or long-term minimal staff. How do you communicate with your employees? If you have to close down temporarily for whatever reason, if there's an outbreak, which has already happened in some apple and pear facilities, what would you do, and how do you work with local health authorities in order to ensure that you can get back up and running? So it is kind of a worst case scenario, but the idea about emergency procedures is making sure you have them so that way when you need them, you're not scrambling to find them. And then lastly would be adjusting your visitors policy. So limiting unavoidable visitors to a minimum. So that includes considering whether or not you're going to have auditors on site, whether or not you're going to have customer or second party audits during a time when you're trying to limit the amount of people in your facility. So really consider that. And if you have visitors coming, making sure that they have and are also following all of the additional hygiene practices at your facility that you have in place. I want to really highlight that these are guidance procedures. It's up to you as a facility and as a farmer to determine what you're going to do in terms of limiting spread in workplaces. And we can only provide you with these best practices and how they relate to GlobalGAP. But we just want to make sure that you're aware of things that other people are doing and best practices that you can follow as well. So some additional practices that we think are good and are helping would be just additional cleaning and sanitation of employee congregation areas, restrooms, smoking areas, hallways, and then some locations are increasing the frequency of sanitation for particular high-touch areas such as clipboards, bins, tabletops, anything where employees are consistently touching scales and weights in the fields if that's applicable as well. And so again, I can't just say it enough, but make sure you're in contact with regional public health departments for wherever you are, because they're the ones that are going to be really responsible for coming up with additional regulatory guidance in your area, and we could just tell you what people are doing internationally to make sure that you're feeling comfortable with what you're doing. Other things that might be helpful to you unrelated to food safety, but there are organizations trying to help make sure that you do have access to a workforce during harvest and during production season, making sure that you have access to PPE. So if you're having trouble or difficulties with that, we could link you to United Fresh, the organizations that are working with the government to make sure that you have access to these resources. And then other things would be financial implications. We know that USDA is working on and has developed a grants program for those facilities and farms that have been impacted financially by COVID-19. So you have the ability to reach out. We could also connect you with USDA. I don't know if there's a Canadian equivalent or outside of the US, but understanding that people are working for you and you're not alone in the difficulties that you're facing right now. For us, linking back to GlobalGAP and some of those resources, we do have an FAQ. This is for producers as well as certification bodies, just talking about those guidance practices I mentioned, as well as the extension processes that are involved in these kinds of things. At this point, I think that was a generic overview of what GlobalGAP is doing, and I want to turn it over to NSF to really dive in on what this means for the audits in practices for you on the farm level. Stephanie?
All right. All right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. Thanks, Rebecca. I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak on this panel with GlobalGAP, and I hope everybody's keeping well and safe during these unprecedented times. So let me just do a quick introduction about myself. My name is Stephanie Sonneveld. I am the Certification Manager for Agriculture North America for NSF. NSF is a public health and safety company. We provide testing, audit, certification, training, and consulting for the food, water, health science, sustainability, and consumer product sectors. Today, I'm going to be speaking specifically about one of our offerings, which is obviously GlobalGAP. So if you would like to advance, thanks. So we are accredited by ANSI and licensed to offer all of these GlobalGAP certification options. Rose already spoke pretty much in depth about most of these, but basically I just wanted to highlight that we are licensed and accredited to offer option 1 and option 2, which is the both the single site and the group certification. So she talked about HPSS and IFA, but also I just wanted to touch on chain of custody, which is ensuring the integrity of the GlobalGAP, the GGN throughout the entire chain. GRASP, which is a social practices assessment, and then some additional add-ons. So there's the FSMA add-on. There's Nurture, which is an add-on required for those producers supplying through Tesco in Europe. There's Spring, which is a water sustainability add-on. TR4, which is a biosecurity for banana production operations. And Albert Heijn, which is an add-on for a retailer in the Netherlands. Produce safety standard, sorry, I keep calling her Rose. Robin already spoke about, and then primary farm assurance. If you have questions about any of these or what we offer, obviously you can ask me or anybody at NSF at any time. Okay, so Rebecca talked about all of the different things that you may want to implement at your operation during this pandemic to keep your employees safe. So NSF has also developed a commitment to our clients, whereby if we are actually going to come onto your site and do an audit because you have not requested an extension, which I will get into later, or the audit that does happen during the extension period, we have this commitment to you also to keep you and your employees safe, as well as to keep our auditors safe. We have policies and procedures in place that ensure that we won't have exposure to COVID, apologize for the spelling mistake there, in the last 2 weeks. The commitment also indicates how the auditors will conduct themselves while they're on site. And I'm going to go into those specific protocols in later slides. Auditors have been instructed to notify their supervisor and their clients if they become sick or test positive for COVID-19 within 14 days of visiting a facility or a farm. And auditors will have a copy of this commitment with them and make it available to the producers at any time if they would like to see it. Want to advance? Thank you. So before entering the client site, whether that be you know, a farm or like an outdoor farm or a packing house or anything, the auditor is required to self-monitor for symptoms and check their temperature to make sure they don't have a fever. If they do, they're not going to conduct your audit. The auditor will be asking of you, do you have anyone on the premises who has tested positive for COVID-19 in the past 14 days? If you have, then the audit will not go forward. If you have any specific health and safety control measures that the auditor needs to be aware of. So want to ask that in advance to make sure that they can be prepped for it. And also if there are any local safety requirements that they need to be aware of. So for example, if they're coming into an area where they have to be quarantined for 14 days before they can do anything, obviously that's something that we need to be aware of. Next, thanks. So at the site, our auditors are required to provide their own mask and wear it. They're required to manage their personal effects. So meaning, you know, they're not going to bring anything onto your into your site unnecessarily. They're going to sanitize their phone and their laptop, and obviously wash their hands frequently, carry sanitizer, follow any of the requirements that you have on your site as well. Auditors will be practicing physical distancing and anything, like I said, any other requirements that you have. For example, if there's a particular type of mask that you're required the auditor to wear, then they will obviously wear it. And as Rebecca mentioned, GlobalGAP offers the option of doing an off-site document review. So wherever possible, we are instituting that to minimize the amount of time that auditors spend on site. So as Rebecca mentioned as well, we have the ability, of course, to offer a 6-month extension if you feel it is necessary because of the pandemic. So we have a protocol, and it is that the very first part is that we will request in writing the extension and provide the reason why. Sorry, one second. So as part of that extension process, we will do a risk assessment. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. So as part of the extension process, and to ensure the integrity of the certification during the extension period, we may be asking you for additional information. So we do a risk assessment, and it's based on what it is that you're doing at your site. If you have high risk commodities or are practicing high risk activities, if you've the types of corrective actions that you've had in the past, if there's been any complaints or recalls associated with either the products you grow or with your operation. And there's a whole bunch of other criteria that we look at as well. Based on that risk assessment, after we give you the extension, we may ask for additional documentation just to ensure that you're continuing to follow your program. So can you go to the next slide? So one thing I forgot to mention is basically you'll request the extension in writing, just via email, saying, whatever reason related to COVID-19 that you have for not wanting to have an on-site audit. We will grant you the extension, and you will get the an updated certificate, online certificate, emailed to you. During that extension period, you are required to still have an on-site audit. But before that happens, we may ask you for this additional information. We will review it just to ensure that you're continuing to follow your program during the extension period. There will be a small charge associated with the review, but this charge will be credited towards the on-site audit that will happen during the extension period. Next slide. That was actually it for me. It was actually quite fast. If there's any questions, I'm very happy to answer them. And again, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about NSF's response to COVID-19.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Stephanie. Thanks, Rebecca and Robin. Please put any questions that you have in the chat box, and I will ask them to the group. We do have one question, Stephanie. Someone was asking, can they apply for an extension of certification, but then change it to a remote audit?
So it really depends on which standard you're being audited to. So, and what you mean by remote audit. If you just mean remote desktop, remote document review, then yes, that can be done. We can do that at any point during the extension period. For NSF specifically, for IFA, in order for GFSI recognition to be maintained, and I guess this is the same for HPSS, a fully remote audit is not acceptable at this time by GFSI. So if you need your certificate to be GFSI recognized, you have to at least have the on-site audit done. The 6-month extension still applies if you need it, but the only portion that can be done remotely is the document review. I hope that answers your question.
Well said, Stephanie. I think it's important to clarify the differences about what GFSI accepts and doesn't accept in these Q&A, so thank you.
Yeah. Are there any follow-up questions to that? Because I know that's a little bit confusing.
There is another question. It's not a follow-up. I don't see a follow-up yet, but I do see another question. What will be the validity after the 6-month extension period for the establishment in the case of a renewal?
Okay, so Rebecca, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that the validity will revert back to the original period, the original cycle, expiration cycle.
Yes. Yeah, and this is because the extensions are a temporary emergency measure. It's not a new normal in terms of certification cycles, and we want to make sure that this is used when it needs to be used and not something that we create a habit from. Big silence after that.
Yeah, is there anybody else that has questions? Again, please feel free to let us know, and we can get them answered.
If not, obviously, if there's questions after the fact that you think of, we're always available. You can email us.
Yes.
I think the next slide is our contact information.
Yeah, lastly, I just want to say I hope that it's clear that these are all resources and things that you can do for best practices and temporary measures to alleviate some of the pressure of auditing, but what you choose to do with the guidance and the decisions you make are based upon your risk assessments and what you need to do to keep operating for your facility. So all of the things that we mentioned are just examples, and hopefully you pick and choose from the best things that work from you. And like Stephanie said, we want to make sure that you have our contact information to email or call whenever you do have questions or if you're struggling with any sort of implementation practices and need advice.
Okay, that's great.
Thank you so much, everybody. We really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thank you very much.